January the 29th. Not quite sure what day of the week it is. I think it's either a Tuesday or a Wednesday. But you know what, it doesn't really matter. And I'm not totally sure whether it's the 24th or the 25th day of Jewel of Arabia. They all merge into one continuum, really. But I'm recording this first thing in the morning as opposed to in the evening when I do most of the podcast, because it's just such a beautiful morning. It's one of the few mornings where we've woken where there's absolutely no wind, and it's just beautiful to be surrounded, or to wake up in a place that's to be surrounded by 5,000 frankincense trees. Not many people can say that. So we're very, very fortunate and very grateful for the team here to let us camp close to the frankincense park. And the sun's been up about 30 minutes, a soft light picking out these lovely low limestone hills and wadis around us. A beautiful place and very, very peaceful. A lovely night, quite cold. Woke up about 2-3 o'clock as usual and had to pull a blanket over the top of me to try and stay warm. Just been to retrieve the camera trap, another fox, and some camel legs walking past the camera. So clearly there are camels in the park, and camels grazing the trees are a bit of an issue. So hopefully they can continue to limit the numbers of the camels getting access into the park so that the trees are able to grow without being grazed heavily by the camels. And another fox, of course. I think we're doing a pretty good job of feeding the fox population in Oman as we travel with our tuna. But a good night and a good day for us ahead today, no doubt. We're off fairly soon to meet the deputy wali of the community of Thumrait, because Wadi Doka is located halfway between Thumrait and Salalah. So we're heading north today. We're not going to Salalah yet. We're back on the trail of Bertram Thomas a little bit later on today. But when we do head north to Thumrait, we'll be going close to something really special and unique and fantastic, which is called a raptor restaurant. And a raptor is a bird of prey, like an eagle or a vulture. And when I first came to Oman about 21 years ago, if you went into the bookshop and you bought a book called The Wildlife of Oman, it would tell you that the best bird watching place in Muscat was the rubbish dump at a place called Bausha, just outside Muscat. And if you went to Bausha, you had to keep the windows of your car wound up because it was full of flies. But sitting on the rocks all around the rubbish dump and on the top of the little hills that surrounded the rubbish dump, it was something like Alfred Hitchcock's movie The Birds, because there were hundreds and hundreds of birds of prey sitting on the rocks. And the reason they were there was because of the offal and the sort of food waste that was mixed up in all the rubbish that was being dumped there. And Oman and the Middle East is a bridge, a sort of biological corridor, a flight path between Arabia and Asia. And the birds that migrate through of course need energy to continue their migration. So these rubbish dumps served as a series of fuel stations and filling stations for these migrating birds. And Bausha was the place to go, but obviously what was acceptable in the 1990s is not acceptable anymore in terms of environmental health and standards. So if you go to Bausha today, you won't find a single bird of prey there, because when the rubbish is dumped, it's covered pretty quickly, and there are no more flies and there are no more opportunities for these poor birds to eat. And so someone somewhere has come up with a great idea, and it's these ideas, these stories of innovation that we've been trying to share with you as we travel through Oman on the Jewel of Arabia expedition. One of the fantastic people that I'm fortunate to meet when I travel through Oman is a guy I really like, Dr. Mohab Al-Hinai. And Dr. Mohab works for a company called Beer. And what I like about Dr. Mohab is when you meet him, you feel the passion he has for his job. He describes himself as a sustainability junkie, and I think he fits that perfectly. Whenever I whenever I'm not sure about something, I'll send Dr. Mohab an email or a WhatsApp, and he's always so incredibly helpful. Comes back with great information that helps me understand some of the issues. And so at BIA, they've looked at this issue of the rubbish and the dumps and the changing legislation and the birds. And they've cast their eye far and wide beyond the shores of Oman to India, where these raptor restaurants have been running for some time. And the idea is that you separate the food waste from the general waste and leave that in a site that's fenced off, separate from the regular waste. So there's minimal vehicle disturbance, there aren't trucks coming in and out all day, and the only people allowed, or the only things allowed into that site, are the birds of prey. So these are veritable restaurants for the migrating raptors, and the first one of its kind is very close to becoming operational, very close to where I'm sitting in Thumrate. So when I was last in Muscat, I went to BIA, and I met one of the senior sustainability team there, Ahmed Al Zubair, and I asked Ahmed to explain to me how the idea of raptor restaurants works and how they're getting on with the project.
So Oman, geographically, for these birds, is very important. Why? Because these birds are migratory. So during winter, they're usually around in Oman, and then during summer, where it's a bit too hot here, they go up north. For example, I think Egyptian vultures, which we deal with a lot at BIA, reach up to let's say Kazakhstan. So imagine a line drawn through a map through Kazakhstan, going down south Iran, and then to north of Oman, Musandam, and then along the coast, Salalah, and then even entering Africa. Another thing is these birds tend to not fly over water bodies as well, or they try to minimize it as much as possible. And Oman being coastal, I'm guessing they would be flying in, and then when they reach the coast, they'll be like, okay, I can't cross it. So they go along the coast all the way down, and maybe to even neighboring countries, looking for food. But also they love, during the winter season, which is around September till around February or March, for them Oman's weather is perfect for breeding purposes and just for livability in general. They just love they love the weather, they love the conditions. And then you mentioned something important, which is kind of part of our history now, and we're moving away from it, but our dumps, trash dumps. And as you kind of briefly mentioned, they're birds of prey, so they look for food, but they look for, I like to call these birds shy birds as well, because they're not the type that would attack and kill. Of course some would, but the ones we deal with, which are mainly Egyptian vultures and steppe eagles, they look for dead animals. And if you're even you as a human or another animal or species would be around their food, they wouldn't even go there. You'd see them roaming around, waiting, shy. I go back to that word. And that's important because our dumps previously or historically in Oman provided access to food for them. So in addition to the lovely environment here, they had a buffet of food just laying there for them. And now why is BIA interested or concerned, let's say, with these birds, is when BIA took over, and especially in 2015, these dumps are not environmentally friendly, not socially friendly as well to neighboring living communities, fires, emissions, whatnot. The company, the first mandate, the first priority was let's move away from these dumps and build what we call engineered landfills, which are much more sanitary and safe. And most critically, waste, when it is still dumped in these landfills, although safely, this waste is covered on a daily basis. Yeah, so you can imagine waste is put in a big, clean or a safe hole, compacted, but then covered every day to avoid emissions and all that. And the birds did not like that.
Yes,
as you can imagine.
You just explained that.
Yeah.
So obviously standards today environmentally are much
Exactly.
and that's good news, isn't it? Standards are much higher everywhere in the world, I would say. And that'll explain what you just said. Will explain why I revisited that site where I went 20 years ago, which was full of vultures and eagles. So I guess then it wasn't covered every day, and there was plenty of food around. So when I went recently, there wasn't a single bird there, but the site was incredibly tidy. Like you said, there was a layer of treated earth, I guess, or compacted earth on top.
Yeah.
So that food wasn't available to them as it used to be. So on that basis of environmental improvement, obviously there's a potential negative impact, isn't there, on the raptors, which is where this idea of raptor, you described it as a buffet, which I really like. So someone called it a raptor restaurant to me. So what are you thinking? What's this project all about, raptor restaurants?
Yeah. So the name is funny, and I remember when we pitched it the first time, even to our management, they were like dumbfounded. They just stared at us like, you're opening a restaurant, and we were like, no. So it's a very simple idea. At the end of the day, it's a site that you set aside certain food, or in essence, it is waste at the end of the day. But to these birds, it is food, and you set it aside. And mainly it's carry-ons, dead animals, from slaughterhouse waste. It's parts of animal bodies that we humans don't like to eat or can't even. And these raptors have an ability to consume foods and parts of animals that we can't even digest. Our digestive system would refuse and wouldn't input, let's say. So this type of waste is there anyway. It will always be there, and we can't make use of it. And instead of having it just rot away, it's an opportunity, and that's how we see this project as well. We no longer see it as a negative impact and a challenge, but this is an opportunity for us to give back to these birds, which used to do us a favor, in the past. They would clean up after us. So we're giving back to them. They're happy, hopefully. And then for us, it's it's, even if it's a small percentage, but it's moving towards our diversion targets as well. We want to move away from our landfills one day. We have a 80% diversion target by 2030, I believe. And even if that's a small step, but it is a small step in the right direction. Now, there was challenges, of course, when we started. These species of birds, specifically Egyptian vulture steppe eagles, are globally endangered, and they've been recognized and identified in the IUCN Red List. So they did a study in Oman to see what are the populations locally, and are they endangered here or not. And they saw that there is a healthy number of these birds today, but it is declining. And there are different reasons. One was that in such slaughterhouses, or even before, when it's cattle and it's in farms, they would give them a certain diclofenac, I think they call it, which is basically kind of it's something given to these cattle to make sure that they don't get sick long term and stay healthy. But what would happen is it would become poison later on when they're dead animals, and these birds would feed on them. So that was one of the first challenges. And I'm happy to say that through the efforts of ESO and EA, they have banned the use of this chemical in Oman for this purpose. So that was one of the biggest hurdles or challenges, and it's been, let's say, passed. Another was electrocution. So these birds, they like to perch, and they like, and as I said, they're shy birds, so they don't like to be in the city with humans. So they tend to be in remote areas, and these remote areas have these long, long range electric wires, high voltage, and they like to perch on them, and unfortunately, some were being electrocuted. Another challenge, and of course I'm talking nationally here, another national challenge with these birds was illegal hunting. People would just catch them, hobbyists maybe, where they're not sure, they're not very fully aware of what these birds are and their status globally and all of that. So there was a bit of that as well. And then finally, which is the final challenge, which is related to us, was access to food. Yeah, and like I described, as BM moved to more sanitary landfills, it became a challenge for them. So we're trying to target that fourth challenge and give them access to food. And like I said, they are shy, so it's not just a matter of just throwing food on the side. You kind of have to create a site where it's a bit safe from other predators or other species, because like I said, they are shy birds, and if they see someone else in amongst the food, they'll be like, oh, not my turn yet. So you kind of have to do a bit of let's say setting up the site, but at the end of the day, it is simply just a fence site, where they can also clearly, if you remember, one of my first points was they rely on their eyesight.
Yes.
So you need to make sure they can also see it from high above.
Incredible. So I mean, that's brilliant. It's so interesting, and these things are always much more complex than you think initially. And but I know you're moving towards establishing. Is it the first raptor restaurant?
Yes.
And just for the people listening to this podcast, just so they can visualize what a raptor restaurant looks like. It's simply like you described, it's a fairly remote site, so not too close to human activity.
Exactly.
So a truck would come every day, I would imagine, and just get rid of this animal waste.
Exactly. So you described it very well. So it is a site a bit remote, so it will still be in our landfill sites, just to make sure that we can monitor, control it. But in, let's say, a corner or to the side where, like you say, there's not daily trucks or human activity. It is fenced, but wire fenced, so that the birds can still see. But you still need to fence it due to, we have wadi dogs in Oman. We have in Amrat, which is here in Muscat, our landfill, there's a lot of donkeys.
Yes.
So you need to make sure these animals don't interfere as well with that, because as I say, these birds don't like that. Now we have 11 landfills throughout Oman, one for every governorate, and Dhofar being the southernmost governorate, and that's where Thamreit landfill serves Dhofar. So as in the south, it's usually steppe eagles is what you'll find. Now, of course, you'll find here and there other raptors, but mainly you'll find steppe eagles. And as you go north, so around Masira, which is kind of midpoint of Oman, maybe a bit to north, that's where you'll start to see the Egyptian vultures. And I think you mentioned seeing in Boshar, which is in Muscat, a lot of Egyptian vultures probably.
Fantastic.
And now they've moved more towards Amarat, because we've closed, like I said, we've closed most of the dumps, if not all. When I say closed, I mean fenced off, and we do not operate them anymore. And we've moved to these landfills. So the one in Amarat, which we call Al Multaqa, if you do go there, you will find a number of them. Now that it's summer and it's a bit hot, maybe not much. Although there is a resident population, so they're not purely just passing by Oman. I think that was the original thought,
Yes.
was that Oman was just a passage through.
Yes.
But I think through the incredible work of ESO and EA, they've seen that no, there are some that like to stay and permanently live in Oman. But like I said, during the winter season is where you can see them with tens and even hundreds. And if I can just mention quickly, in Thamreit, going back to Thamreit, a few years back when we were exploring this idea, you know, it was, I wouldn't call it a crazy idea, but it was new to us, to Oman. It's not a new idea globally. Of course, we did, at the end of the day, we researched and found this idea. They call it the vulture restaurant usually, because it's usually targeted at vultures specifically. We found it in Nepal, India, South Africa,
Really?
Eswatini. So the idea is there. We did not create something, but for Oman it was new, and it sounded crazy, but it sounded too simple. You know, do you just put food out there and they'll just come? Do you need to invite them? Do you need to, I don't know, put signs? Do you need to tell them, here's the food? Do you need to put lights? So we're like, let's just try. And the guys operating the Thamreit landfill and our great service provider down there, they took the initiative and they laid out, I believe it was poultry farm waste. So like chicken legs and you know, the bits that you wouldn't, parts of the chicken that you wouldn't eat.
Yes.
And they just laid them out on the side. And at the same time, ESO was running a counting exercise during that period. And around that time, the site, I think there was not just under 20 steppe eagles roaming around. But once the food was put out there, in a matter of weeks, there were, I think, almost 300.
Wow.
Imagine the jump.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it's amazing how these birds find their way, you know? They just, we didn't have to put in any announcement, no social media for birds, no Twitter, ironically.
I think they definitely tweet.
They do tweet. But I don't know if it's, they communicate, they definitely see, and it's part of their eyesight, amazing eyesight.
Yeah, it's the same story, Ahmed, that we did a podcast recently with an oil company that uses green reed beds to filtrate the water. And again, it's this something that you create in this arid environment. It's a source of food. And how do they know that it's there? You know, it must be just visual initially,
Exactly.
but how do they communicate amongst themselves?
Yeah.
And I guess the reason we know they go to Kazakhstan is because of satellite telemetry, and you know, we're finding out more and more about these incredible creatures, aren't we? But
Exactly.
you know, I've never met anybody or anything that would not be attracted by a free restaurant, and you don't need to make a booking before you go, and do it without reservations. And I was laughing when you said the fence to keep the dogs out, because I have 2 Omani dogs that we rescued. They were wild Wadi dogs, and I can spend a fortune buying the most expensive dog food from the vets here in Muscat.
Yeah.
And yet when I take my dogs for a walk, if there's a bit of old food stuck in the bush, that's what they go for. The smellier the better.
Yeah.
So it's a good job you build a fence. So Ahmed, this has been really, really interesting. And you know, I just go back to that little statement that I read on the wall downstairs about future generations, and I think these birds are magnificent.
Excellent.
And I think if you know, children and future generations can enjoy the sights that we enjoy, those of us that are lucky enough to see these incredible birds in the air or on the mountains, then that's really important. And that again, connecting to what you said at the start, is what sustainability is all about.
Yeah, and if you allow me just to add to that point, is one of our long-term visions as well is, once these sites hopefully are healthy and running, that we can open them up to, you know, bird watchers. I didn't know this, but apparently there's a lot of bird watchers that even come to Nema's wastewater. Just next to their wastewater plant, there's now a whole habitat of rare birds, and it's beautiful, and we'd like to also, you know, learn from that idea and take it as an opportunity to kind of invite people to not just, of course it is about the birds, but then it's also an introduction to waste management as well. So it's an opportunity for us to get people to get to know about our work, where their waste ends up, and how we can all do better.
Fantastic.
In a nutshell,
Fantastic. No, that's a perfect end. Ahmed, thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.